Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about living in alignment with nature's cycles. And before that, I do have one exciting announcement. As of today, my newest journaling workbook is out. This is Living in Alignment with Nature's Cycles. It contains journaling prompts for staying in tune with the seasons and the moon phase. And when I hinted at this journal in a community post a few weeks ago, I got some questions about the benefits of living in alignment with nature, so I figured today that's what I would discuss. And if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about what's in the journal, I'll go into that a little bit at the end as well. But let's just get straight into it. Why is it important for humans to live in alignment with nature? Spending time in nature has been known that it increases mood, decreases anxiety and depression. Forest bathing, also called forest therapy, has been shown to lower cortisol, heart rate, blood pressure, inflammation, just generally induce states of relaxation and also improve your immune function. Green spaces, things like parks, forests, also specifically improve mood, happiness, well-being, decrease symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, anger, anxiety. They have been shown to improve attention by something called the attention restoration theory, which is that nature provides something called soft fascination, which allows the brain to recover from cognitive fatigue that we experience in day-to-day life. They also improve focus. For example, walking in nature has been shown to improve focus by up to 20%. They also boost creativity by up to 50% because spending time in nature frees up mental clutter. And they also improve decision-making because, again, they reduce overstimulation, of which we have so much in our day-to-day life. Blue spaces, which is things like lakes, coastlines, river walks, have also specifically been shown to reduce depression, stress, and distress. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all the blue zones, which are actually a misnomer, they're called blue zones for a different reason. That's where all the high concentrations of supercentenarians live, people who live over 100 years old. They're all by the coast, all 5 of them. Again, I don't think that's a coincidence. The truth is that we're just not built to live out of alignment with nature. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution crafted us to best survive off the lands which we inhabit. And industrialization and digitalization are just a tiny, tiny fraction of our history. They're this tiny blip that if you were to look at the timeline of humankind, you wouldn't even see it on the timeline. That's how small it is. So our bodies have not yet caught up with evolution in the sense that these new technologies that we have, they're not necessarily good for us. We haven't evolved for them to be adaptive. We've evolved to find natural environments more adaptive, green spaces, blue spaces, spending time in nature, because historically that's what we were doing a lot of. So it was in our best interest for what we were doing a lot of to be good for us. For example, I'm sure you know that most people crave high caloric foods, like very few people crave strawberries. Most people crave like McDonald's. And that is because back in the day, we had to expend a ton of energy to get sources of food. And so it was adaptive for us to crave anything that was super high calorie because it meant it kept us nourished for longer and that then we would have energy reserves to go hunt some more. Another example is that we are just not built to multitask or for the sensory overload that we have in modern times. So there are different ways of looking at how to live in alignment with nature cycles. You have, on one hand, the solar cycle, like the everyday quotidian solar cycle. Sun comes up, sun goes down. And we know that early sunlight exposure helps with things like energy levels, combating insomnia, boosting mood. Lack of sunlight leads to vitamin D deficiency, which clinically I have seen so many cases of people who initially came in the wintertime to therapy, were experiencing depressive symptoms. I recommended that they check in with their doctor about their vitamin D levels, and once they were put on a vitamin D regimen, their depressive symptoms all but disappeared. Living in alignment with light cycles also tends to improve sleep quality. I think it's part of why we all hate daylight savings time because it's not natural for the sun to set an hour earlier than it needs to. It really affects us psychologically. And obviously when we lose an hour of sleep, that also negatively affects us because again, it's just not natural. Our bodies are not built to sustain this. And any sort of circadian rhythm disruptions, like people who are not staying awake during the day and sleeping at night, can be harmful to a person's physical and mental health. For example, circadian rhythm disruptions have been associated with manic and depressive cycles in bipolar patients. There are health risks to working the night shift as well, because again, we're not meant to be out of sync with nature's cycles. We evolved to best exist alongside the environment we inhabit. What about living in alignment with the seasonal cycles? Well, eating seasonal food has certain benefits. They tend to be fresher, more nutrient dense, and they contain certain vitamins and minerals that we might need at that particular point in time. For example, in the fall and winter, there are a lot of foods that are high in beta-carotene, which helps immune function going into the cold months when, as we know, there tends to be more flu season. Whereas summer foods, like fruits for instance, tend to offer a lot of hydration and antioxidants, which can be helpful against sun exposure in the months where it's hotter and UV rays are stronger. There are also certain trends across the cycle. For example, people tend to be more introverted and more introspective during the colder, darker months, whereas they tend to be a lot more socially engaged in the summer. And this makes sense if you think about how many species hibernate during the winter. And there's currently this movement going on called wintering, which is living in tune with the idea that in the winter, we're not supposed to have these huge amounts of energy. We are supposed to rest to some degree. Paying attention to seasonal shifts can also just help you be more mindful and appreciative of the present moment, because instead of wishing for a better time of the cycle that you prefer, you can honor and savor every single moment of the cycle and recognize that there's value in it and that what goes up must come down. You can't just always have the thing that you prefer. You have to also have its polar opposite. And so that fosters a sense of acceptance and resilience about pushing through and even, again, savoring those moments that you typically might not like. And then there's also the aspect of certain cultural rites that take place at certain parts of the season. And these are very much meant to foster a sense of warmth and connection, and they have benefits of their own. For example, Thanksgiving Day. There are so many proven benefits of gratitude, like pro-social behavior, increased empathy, increased connectedness, better mood, lowering depression and anxiety. Why do so many of us absolutely lose our minds when it comes to spooky season or cozy season? Yes, part of it might be that it's taken on this sort of collective narrative on its own and become this social bonding experience for us. But I think it also speaks to something deeper. I think it also speaks to the idea that we know we need to live in tune with nature cycles and to recognize that it's good for us. And in fact, we love that shit. Also, people who live more in tune with the seasons tend to be more eco-friendly. So that's another added benefit. Now, what about living in alignment with the lunar cycle, with the phases of the moon? In olden days, there were a lot of traditions associated with living in alignment with the lunar cycle. For example, planting seeds when the moon is waxing, when it's growing in terms of its light, because symbolically, that's the growth phase of the lunar cycle. And it was later theorized that this is because light increases towards the full moon, which draws up sap flow. From what I understand, this is kind of a myth, but on a symbolic level, it still speaks to me personally. And to be clear, this is where things get a little bit more spiritual and less scientific for me, because while I don't believe that the moon has a huge impact on us as humans, I love it. I stare at the moon for like 30 minutes every time I see it. I'm obsessed with the moon. And I love what it represents, this waxing and waning that is so integral to everything in life. Now, there are some very limited studies, very small studies, that do suggest the moon has an influence on us. For example, we tend to sleep less during the full moon. Some species tend to be more active during the full moon, and there is a possible link, again, it's a very small study, between bipolar cycles of mania and depression and the lunar cycle. And then there's, of course, the fact that women's menstrual cycles are typically about as long as the lunar cycle, which it's believed may have evolved in conjunction. But to me, staying in tune with the moon cycles, like I said, is a lot less about the health benefits and more about the symbolism of it. At the new moon, when the moon starts to wax, when it starts to grow, that's associated with new beginnings, with setting intentions, with sowing the seeds of our desires. At the full moon, that's kind of the climax of the cycle, and it's when there's typically a lot of celebration and a lot of rituals associated with it, but it's also when we start to go into the waning portion of the moon cycle, which means that it's a period of release, of gratitude, of forgiveness, of shedding the parts of us that no longer serve us, so that other parts can have room to grow. Because all of life is about the fluidity between the beginnings and the endings, between shedding and growing, between waxing and waning. Like, imagine if a plant would grow forever. It would become monstrous. It would start to wreak havoc on everything around it, because you can't have consistent growth. You also need to have shedding as well. So being aligned with the lunar cycle means dedicating a specific time of the month to growing and a specific time of the month to shedding. a specific time to setting intentions, and a specific time to resting. And I find that to be really valuable. So to tell you a little bit more about the journal, what it contains is for every month of the year, you get a journaling prompt. For every new moon and full moon of the month, you get 2 journaling prompts each. And then for every Sabbath, you also get 2 journaling prompts. Now, Sabbats are what we call the equinoxes, the solstices, and the midpoints between them. Now, these are drawn from nature-based pagan spiritualities. So they have their roots in Celtic mythology, Nordic mythology, Greek and Roman, and basically it combines the cycle of us rotating around the sun every year, along with the cycle of the moon going from new to full to new and back to full. Each part of the cycle has its own sort of characteristics and specific journaling prompts because of that. Just an example of what a couple of the pages look like. Now, I created this because, to my knowledge, I don't know of any journal for like journaling across the year, across the seasons, and the moon tracking journal that I used, I was not very happy with, to tell you the truth. Every month it was just the same questions over and over again, and often very closed questions, like, are you ready to forgive this full month? I mean, what am I meant to say to that? Yes? No? Like, to me, that's not a very challenging journaling prompt, so I don't really love that. So I said, okay, well, if this doesn't exist, then I'm gonna make my own. And if you guys are interested in it, then you can get it as well. This is actually a great time of the year to purchase it because it starts obviously with January, and so we're nearing the beginning of another year. So if you want to learn more about this, you can click the link in the description box or in the pinned comment and check it out. And this one, I will say, is a lot more spiritual for me than psychological. And I want to specify that because it doesn't have like psychological techniques or anything like that in it. I personally do have a very nature-based spiritual outlook, and that is reflected in the journaling workbook. And if you are against that for some reason, then it's probably not the journaling workbook for you. And even some of the comments I got on my community post where I hinted that I was going to post this were a little bit hysterical, to tell you the truth. Like, oh my God, living in alignment with nature cycles, the moon, she mentioned the moon. So if that's not your thing, then don't get it. No one's forcing you to get it. But if it does sound cool to you, definitely check it out. Anyway, I hope this video was interesting. I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.